When my aunt passed away, she left me a quiet piece of land, a small, peaceful lake tucked behind rows of million-dollar homes. I thought it was paradise, until the HOA president called the cops, claiming my lake was an eyesore. What they didn't know was that the lake wasn't just mine, it was public water. And I was about to use that fact to turn their entire community upside down. If you believe karma always finds its way, hit that subscribe button, because this is one story of poetic justice the HOA never saw coming. The first time I saw the lake, mist hung over its still surface like a secret waiting to be told. My Aunt Eleanor had spent her final years here, tending to a humble cabin by the water's edge, far from the polished lawns and symmetrical driveways of the nearby Silver Birch estates. The lake had no name on Google Maps, just a shimmer of blue surrounded by old trees, but it was hers, now mine. The letter from her lawyer said it plainly. I leave my property and the surrounding lake to my niece, Emma Grace. At first, it felt like a gift from another world, a retreat from city noise. But within a week, that peace fractured. The first knock came on a Saturday morning. 3 people stood outside the gate, all in neat polo shirts embroidered with SBE HOA. The leader was a tall, severe woman named Patricia, the kind of person who smiled without warmth. Her eyes scanned the property as if taking inventory of everything wrong with it. Miss Grace, she began, as you're probably new to the neighborhood, you should know our community values high standards. Your lake, she paused as if the word itself tasted bitter, has been a concern. Algae, fallen branches, an old boat dock? It reflects poorly on our image. I blinked. My lake reflects poorly on your image? Patricia smiled again, thinner, colder. Silver Birch Estates prides itself on its beauty. We'd appreciate it if you cleaned up your shoreline. It wasn't even their shoreline. My aunt's property existed just outside their HOA boundary, by 20 feet. But that didn't stop Patricia from acting like she ruled the water itself. Over the next week, letters began arriving. Community appearance violation. Visual nuisance. Even potential environmental hazard. I ignored them, until one morning red and blue lights flashed across the lake. 2 county deputies stood beside Patricia and her HOA board, pointing toward my dock. Ma'am, one officer said carefully, we received a report of environmental dumping. I almost laughed. Dumping? It's a lake. It's been here for decades. Patricia's voice was sharp. The stagnant water, the weeds, it's breeding mosquitoes. This affects all our residents. The deputy shifted uncomfortably. We'll need to contact the County Water Authority to verify ownership boundaries. That one sentence, verify ownership, changed everything. I went to the county office the next day, papers in hand. The clerk, an older man named Walter, squinted at the plat map. You said Silver Birch called the cops? Figures. They've been pushing for development around here for years. He tapped the map with a pen. You're sitting on something interesting, Miss Grace. See this? He drew a faint blue line connecting the lake to a tributary that led to the main reservoir. That's public water. Your aunt's property covers the shore, but the lake itself, legally, it's part of the county's water table. My heart skipped. So they can't touch it? Walter grinned. They can't own it. In fact, if they're interfering with it, they could be violating county law. When I left the office, my mind raced with possibilities. The HOA had called the cops on me for having an ugly lake. But if what Walter said was true, their perfect neighborhood sat beside county-controlled water. And that meant their entire illusion of control was built on a lie. The next weekend, Patricia returned. This time with a landscaper. They stood at the fence, discussing beautification, plans for the shoreline, my shoreline. I recorded everything. As they measured, I stepped outside. Patricia, I said calmly, I spoke with the County Water Authority. Her smile faltered. I just thought you should know, I continued. They'll be inspecting this entire area soon, including Silver Birch's drainage system. That was the first time I saw real fear flicker across her face, because she knew something I didn't yet. That night, while scrolling through old records online, I found the answer. Silver Birch Estates' irrigation system drained directly into the lake. For years, their manicured lawns had been leaching fertilizer and pesticide runoff into county water. Suddenly, their ugly lake wasn't my problem, it was evidence. I took photos, dated them, logged every pipe I could find. By morning, I had a full report ready to send to the county. When I hit submit, a strange calm washed over me. For the first time, I wasn't the target. I was holding the cards. But what I didn't realize was that by exposing the HOA, I'd also awakened something far larger. The bureaucratic machine that moves only when scandal smells fresh. Within days, inspectors arrived, county trucks, testing equipment, cameras. The HOA board gathered on the street, their smiles gone, their whispers tense. By sunset, the inspectors were shaking their heads. One of them approached me privately. "You weren't wrong," he said. "They've been dumping into this lake for years. It's a major violation." When I glanced across the water, Patricia's face was pale. For the first time, I felt justice, slow, quiet, inevitable, like the ripples spreading across the lake itself. But justice has a way of turning tides, and the next tide was about to hit harder than anyone expected. Because the county wasn't just investigating Silver Birch Estates anymore. They were planning to claim the lake, and appoint someone to oversee it. And that someone would be me. The letter from the County Water Authority arrived on a rainy Thursday, its envelope stamped with the county seal. I tore it open with a mix of dread and curiosity, my hands trembling just slightly. The letter began formally, following recent environmental investigations into the Silver Birch Estates drainage network, and then came the line that made my heart race. "You, as the legal inheritor of the adjoining property, are hereby granted provisional stewardship of Lake Eleanor under the County Water Management Act." Lake Eleanor. My aunt's name. I hadn't known the lake was ever formally registered, but there it was in black and white. The letter went on to explain that my property now served as an observation zone for environmental restoration. I had authority to monitor, report, and even restrict activities affecting the lake's condition. It was surreal. The HOA that once sent me threats for visual nuisances would now answer to me. By the next morning, county workers were installing bright yellow environmental protection zone signs around the lake's perimeter. The moment Patricia saw them, she marched down the hill in a storm of indignation, phone in hand. She pointed at one of the signs. "This is vandalism," she snapped. "You can't just post government property on HOA land." I calmly handed her a copy of the letter. Her eyes scanned it, and for a moment, all the color drained from her face. "This can't be right," she muttered. "You're not even part of this community." I smiled slightly. "You're right, Patricia. I'm not. I'm part of the county." For weeks, she tried to fight it. Complaints poured into the local office about unfair oversight, misuse of power, visual contamination by county signage. But every complaint came back stamped, denied. Meanwhile, I began learning more about what the HOA had been hiding. The inspection reports were damning. For years, Silver Birch's landscapers had diverted stormwater into underground drains that emptied directly into the lake. That runoff carried nitrogen, phosphorus, and chemical residues, everything that turned the water green and thick each summer. Patricia's eyesore wasn't my doing. It was theirs. The county published a full report online. Within days, local news outlets picked it up. HOA cited for environmental violations. Private lake found contaminated by estate runoff. The video clip went viral. Patricia's furious voice caught on camera as she tried to block the reporters from filming. The irony was delicious, but my satisfaction didn't last long. Because with every ounce of control the HOA lost, their hostility toward me grew. One morning, I woke to find someone had thrown bags of fertilizer over my fence, the same brand used in the HOA's landscaping. Another day, tire tracks cut deep into my yard where someone had driven in circles through the mud. I installed cameras, reported the vandalism. The sheriff's deputy, the same one who'd come that first day, looked apologetic but helpless. "They're not taking it well," he admitted. "You've embarrassed them publicly. Patricia's been making calls to everyone she can, councilmen, county officers, even the mayor." That night, I sat by the water, watching the ripples under the silver moonlight. The lake looked peaceful again, almost proud. My aunt used to sit here too, I remembered. Maybe she knew this would happen one day. The cabin's porch light flickered in the reflection. That's when I saw it, movement across the water. A flashlight beam swept along the opposite shore, near the drainage pipes. Someone was there. I grabbed my own flashlight and started toward the edge, boots crunching through wet grass. By the time I reached the other side, whoever it was had disappeared, but the fresh footprints were clear. I took photos again, documenting everything. When I sent the images to the county investigator, he called within hours. "Miss Grace, thank you for forwarding these," he said. "We've been tracking unauthorized maintenance activities near the HOA's drainage lines. You might have caught them trying to tamper with evidence." That was when things escalated from petty revenge to legal warfare. 2 days later, county vehicles arrived again, this time with environmental enforcement officers and local news crews following closely behind. They began digging near the HOA's main road, exposing hidden pipes that illegally connected to the county's system. The HOA members watched in stunned silence as their pristine lawns were torn open. Patricia came running down the slope, her voice shrill with panic. "You can't do this without a hearing." The lead officer turned to her, calm but firm. "Ma'am, under County Order 112B, all unauthorized discharge lines are subject to immediate removal." I stood at the edge of the property, silent, watching justice unfold in real time. By sunset, excavators had unearthed a tangle of corroded pipes stretching toward the lake. Decades of secret alterations, all now exposed. That evening, I received another letter, this time from the county council. It congratulated me on assisting with the investigation and proposed a formal role, Lake Eleanor's stewardship chairperson, with a modest grant to restore the ecosystem. It felt poetic, from being accused of having an ugly lake to being legally empowered to protect it. The HOA, on the other hand, faced a full environmental audit. Their fines would exceed $150,000. News traveled fast. Homeowners began turning against Patricia. Some demanded her resignation. Others fled community meetings, embarrassed to be associated with the scandal. But Patricia was stubborn, too proud to admit defeat. Instead, she began a whisper campaign. Rumors that I was exploiting the system, that I was profiting off county sympathy, that my aunt had schemed to destroy Silver Birch before she died. It was nonsense, but toxic nonsense spreads quickly. I started finding nasty letters on my porch again. Anonymous, typed, cruel. Some mentioned details only neighbors could know. One morning, a brick shattered my front window. Attached was a single sheet of paper. "You don't belong here. Take your swamp and leave." That was when I realized Patricia wasn't finished. She wasn't just fighting for her image anymore. She was fighting for survival, and she was about to cross a line even the county couldn't ignore. It started with the smell. A strange, metallic tang in the air that didn't belong. The kind that clings to your skin, sharp and unnatural. I noticed it late one evening, while sitting by the lake, going through the county's restoration plans. At first, I thought it was just the lingering odor of wet earth after rain, but then I saw the color. The water wasn't shimmering silver anymore. Under the faint porch light, it looked darker, thick, almost oily. I stepped closer, heart pounding. A faint rainbow sheen spread across the surface like gasoline. Something was wrong. I ran inside, grabbed my flashlight, and followed the shoreline. Within minutes, I found it. A narrow plastic hose, half buried under the mud, snaking from beyond the fence, directly from Silver Birch Estates. The other end bubbled faintly into the lake. Someone had done this intentionally. The next morning, I contacted the County Water Authority immediately. They sent a team by noon, testing kits and all. When one of the technicians dipped a probe into the water, his face hardened. "This isn't runoff," he said. "This is chemical contamination. Looks like herbicides, maybe more." The report arrived 2 days later. The levels were alarming, toxic enough to endanger wildlife. Fish had already started floating near the surface. The serene lake my aunt loved was dying before my eyes. The county classified it as environmental sabotage, and there was no doubt in my mind who had done it. Patricia. That evening, I watched from my porch as she and 2 board members stood near their community gate, whispering under the flickering light. When they saw me, they turned their backs quickly. The next day, she filed another complaint, this time claiming I had introduced contaminants to gain publicity. She even tried to use the county report as evidence against me, twisting the narrative. But the county wasn't buying it. They had already traced the hose back to a property owned by one of Patricia's closest allies, the HOA's landscape chair. It was over for them, or at least, it should have been. When county investigators returned to collect statements, Patricia refused to speak. Her husband, a lawyer, tried to intimidate them, throwing around legal jargon about defamation and property rights. But you can't argue with lab results. The chemicals matched the brand the HOA landscapers used for their lawns. Within a week, the county suspended all HOA irrigation privileges pending investigation. They could no longer water their prized gardens. The once perfect lawns began to brown, and resentment toward Patricia exploded. Residents whispered in driveways. Some even came by my gate quietly at night, apologizing for how I'd been treated. One older man left flowers by the fence and muttered, "She went too far this time." Still, I couldn't shake the image of that black water, thick with poison. The lake wasn't just damaged, it was grieving. Late one night, unable to sleep, I wandered to the dock. The moon hung low, pale and heavy, its reflection trembling in the stillness. I remembered my aunt's voice, calm, wise. "Water remembers, Emma. Everything that touches it, good or bad." I whispered to the lake that I wouldn't let them win. 2 days later, a county hearing was scheduled. It would decide whether the HOA would face criminal charges for environmental violations. The hearing was public, and the tension was electric. The courtroom buzzed with reporters and homeowners alike. Patricia sat in the front row, chin lifted defiantly, dressed in immaculate white, as if purity could be worn like armor. When it was my turn to speak, I stood before the microphone, palms trembling but steadying as I began. I described everything: the harassment, the threats, the hose I'd found, the night the water changed color. The photographs, the videos, the footprints in the mud, all of it. And then I read my aunt's journal entry aloud. The HOA wanted to buy the lake years ago. They said it spoiled their view. I told them it's not for sale, because water doesn't belong to those who only want to own it. It belongs to those who protect it. The room went silent. Even the judge looked moved. Then the county inspector presented the final evidence. Samples directly from the lake, cross-referenced with HOA-purchased chemicals. The match was undeniable. The ruling came swiftly. Silver Birch Estates HOA was found guilty of deliberate environmental damage and obstruction of investigation. They were fined heavily and ordered to fund the full restoration of Lake Eleanor under county supervision, with me as project overseer. Patricia's composure cracked for the first time. Her hands shook. Her lawyer tried to argue, but the judge silenced him with a firm gavel strike. "This is not merely a property dispute," the judge said. "This is about accountability and the arrogance of control." Outside, cameras flashed. News headlines spread like wildfire. HOA found guilty in lake poisoning scandal. Homeowners turn on president after environmental crime. Woman inherits lake. becomes county hero after exposing HOA. But for all the vindication, I couldn't feel joy. Not yet. That night, I stood by the lake again. The cleanup crews had begun skimming the surface, pulling debris and dead fish from the water. The smell of chemicals lingered faintly, mixed with mud and rain. Justice had been served, but something inside me whispered that it wasn't over, because when I walked to the fence line later, a small package lay near the gate. No address, no return label. Inside was a single item, a framed photo. It showed my Aunt, Eleanor, standing by the lake years ago. But across her face, someone had drawn a red X. On the back of the frame, scrawled in jagged handwriting, were 3 words. "This isn't finished." The night air grew colder. The wind rippled the water, carrying whispers I couldn't quite make out. Somewhere across the dark lake, a single porch light flicked on, the one that belonged to Patricia. She was still watching. And I knew the real storm was only beginning. The weeks that followed the trial were heavy with silence, the kind that hides under every sound, like something waiting to break. Silver Birch Estates no longer looked perfect. The once manicured lawns turned yellow and brittle under the county's irrigation ban. The fountains stopped running. The flowers wilted. Even the air felt different, dry, tired, defeated. Patricia vanished from public sight after the hearing. Her house remained dark most nights, blinds drawn. People whispered that she'd been forced out as HOA president, but no one knew for sure. Meanwhile, I spent my days working with the restoration team. The county hired biologists, engineers, and water chemists. Together, we drained sections of the lake, tested the soil, replaced vegetation, and installed filters. Slowly, the water began to clear. The surface shimmered again, soft and reflective, like it was remembering what peace felt like. But the peace didn't last long. It started subtly, small acts of sabotage around the restoration site. Equipment missing. Warning signs torn down. One morning, I found the restoration logbooks soaked in the lake, pages bleeding ink into the water. The county sent patrol officers to monitor the site overnight. For a few nights, things calmed. But then came the fires. One morning, I arrived to find part of the shoreline blackened. A pile of brush and tools had been torched. The officers said it looked like arson, deliberate and fast. Luckily, it hadn't spread far enough to damage the nearby forest. I should have been scared. But instead, I was angry. Because every time something burned, every time something was destroyed, it reminded me why my aunt had fought to protect this place. I went through her old journals again that night, hoping to find some kind of peace. Buried between her handwritten notes, I found a folded letter addressed to whoever inherits this. The ink had faded, but the message was clear. You'll think the fight is about water, but it never is. It's about power, who gets to control what others see, who decides what beauty is. Don't let them tell you how your world should look. The lake doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to live. Reading her words, I felt something stir inside me, resolve. So the next morning, I did something I hadn't done before. I called the local press myself. When the reporters arrived, I showed them everything. The sabotage, the arson site, the letters I'd received, even the framed photo with the red X. The story spread again, louder this time, angrier. Lake Eleanor hero faces retaliation from HOA. Environmental steward targeted in ongoing feud. The HOA board panicked. Several members resigned immediately, distancing themselves from Patricia. The community's silence cracked wide open. That's when I received a call from a woman named Lillian, a former HOA treasurer. Her voice was nervous but steady. "Emma," she said, "I think you should see something. We met at a coffee shop outside town." She handed me a USB drive. Patricia kept private correspondence on the HOA computer, emails, invoices. There are things in there you need to know. When I got home, I plugged it in. The files were endless, financial records, secret contractor payments, and something far worse. Years of correspondence between Patricia and a local developer. They had a plan. A hidden one. Before my aunt passed, Patricia had been negotiating to sell part of the Silver Birch property, including the lake. The developer wanted to drain it, pave over it, and build luxury lakeside villas. But when my aunt refused to sell, the deal collapsed. And now, decades later, Patricia had tried again, only this time by force. The contamination, the sabotage, the harassment, it wasn't about appearances. It was about making the lake worthless so the county would sell it cheap. But her plan had backfired spectacularly. I printed everything and sent it straight to the county prosecutor's office. Within 48 hours, a warrant was issued. Patricia was arrested at dawn. I wasn't there when it happened, but a neighbor recorded it, her standing in her pristine driveway, robe wrapped tightly, hands trembling as officers read her rights. The once feared HOA queen, now exposed under the same morning sun she used to rule over. When the news aired, the entire town erupted with opinions. Some people cheered. Others pitied her. But most just felt relief. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. Something about her expression in that video haunted me. Not anger, not even guilt. It was something deeper. A kind of cold, knowing smile. That night, as I sat by the lake again, a heavy fog rolled in. The water was calm, eerily calm. I thought about Patricia's face, the way she'd looked at the camera before turning away. It wasn't over. I could feel it. The next morning confirmed my fear. The county restoration team arrived to find their storage shed broken into. Inside, all the water treatment chemicals, thousands of dollars worth, were gone. The officers combed through the area but found nothing. It felt like the final desperate strike of a dying empire. By evening, I received another letter. This one postmarked from the county jail. No return address, but I didn't need one to know who it was from. You think you've won, but you don't understand. Silver Birch was never mine. It was built on old land, land that belonged to her. Your aunt wasn't a saint, Emma. She made deals too. Maybe you should ask the county who they really bought the lake from. Her words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. What did she mean? My aunt had always been the hero in this story, the one who resisted greed and power. But what if there was something else? I went back to the county archives the next morning, digging through decades-old property record. And there it was, buried under layers of old deeds and transfers. The lake hadn't originally belonged to my aunt. It had belonged to the county, until she bought it in a private auction no one knew about. And the strange part? The transaction was marked confidential. It didn't make sense. Why would the county sell public land privately? And to her, of all people. The deeper I searched, the darker it got. There were missing files, sealed contracts, even a payment routed through a company that no longer existed. And then I saw the name on one of the old signatures, faded but legible, Patricia H. Langford. Before she was HOA president, before Silver Birch was built, Patricia had been part of the original county planning board. She and my aunt had known each other. They'd built this place together. And now, decades later, I'd inherited not just a lake, but their unfinished war. The discovery shattered everything I thought I knew. My Aunt Eleanor, the woman I'd idolized, the one who spoke about peace, about protecting nature, had once worked with Patricia. Together, they'd built Silver Birch Estates from nothing. I couldn't stop staring at the old county documents. Their signatures sat side by side, elegant and sure, like partners sealing a pact. And yet, somehow, they'd turned into enemies. Why? The more I read, the clearer the picture became. Decades ago, when the county was developing this land, Eleanor was the environmental consultant. Patricia, younger, ambitious, was a county planner. They'd both fallen in love with the same idea, creating a luxury neighborhood wrapped around a pristine lake. But as construction began, Eleanor discovered something alarming. The planned drainage would destroy the natural ecosystem. She protested, filed reports, and even took the county to court. But the developers ignored her warnings. In response, she sabotaged the project from the inside, buying the lake during a quiet private auction and cutting off access to the builders. She won the battle. But she made enemies. Patricia was one of them. Over the years, Patricia had turned that grudge into obsession. She built her perfect community just beyond the lake's border, but she could never control the one thing she wanted most: the water. Now it made sense. The feud hadn't started with me. I was just the one unlucky enough to inherit it. Still, there was something else buried in those files, something that didn't add up. One document, dated only a month before my aunt's death, mentioned a water rights reassessment. It was signed by Eleanor, but the witness line was blank. Had she been planning to give the lake back to the county? Or was she trying to protect it one last time? I needed answers, and there was only one person left who might have them: Patricia. It had been nearly a month since her arrest. She was out on bail, awaiting trial, and living under house arrest in her mansion on the hill. The idea of facing her again made my skin crawl, but curiosity pushed harder than fear. So one gray afternoon, I drove up the long, silent road into Silver Birch Estates. The houses looked weary now, lawns overgrown, shutters faded, the once perfect symmetry falling apart. Her house stood at the very end, isolated like a fortress. She answered the door slowly, her expression unreadable. "I wondered when you'd come," she said softly. "You've been digging." "I found the records," I said. "You and my aunt, you worked together." Her lips curved into something between a smile and a grimace. "Worked together? No, dear. We fought together first." I followed her inside. The house was eerily clean, every surface spotless. A single photo sat on the mantel: the lake, decades ago, shining under a blue sky. "She thought she could save it," Patricia said, pouring tea as if we were old friends. "Your aunt was brilliant. But she didn't understand politics. She thought the lake could be preserved if she just owned it. But that land, it was never meant to stay wild. The county planned to expand here long before either of us arrived." I frowned. "So poisoning it, sabotaging it, that was your way of saving it?" Her eyes flickered, a strange sadness buried behind them. "I didn't poison it, Emma. I wanted to expose what the developers were still doing beneath your lake." I froze. "What are you talking about?" She slid a file across the table. Photocopied documents stamped confidential. Eleanor wasn't wrong to fight the county. But she didn't realize they never stopped building underneath. There's a buried stormwater control tunnel, a network of old pipes still feeding runoff into the water table. They've been hiding it for years. I tried to reveal it. You were supposed to find it too. I didn't know what to believe. Her words sounded like another manipulation, yet something in her tone felt sincere, weary. When I left the house, my head spun. That night, I opened the file she'd given me. The schematics were old, grainy, but there it was, a hidden storm drain network leading directly under the lake. The next morning, I called the county engineers. They were skeptical at first, but after checking the oldest blueprints, one of them called back, his voice tense. "Miss Grace, we didn't build those tunnels." That one sentence chilled me. So who did? By sunset, the restoration crew began digging near the shallow end of the lake. The ground was soft, damp, and strangely warm. After several hours, they found it, a massive rusted hatch buried under layers of silt and root. The metal was engraved with faint letters: Project Blueveil, 1989. It was real. The engineers forced it open. A foul odor escaped, a mix of metal, earth, and something older. Inside, a narrow passage led into darkness. We followed with flashlights. The tunnel walls were concrete, lined with pipes and forgotten machinery. Every few meters we saw faded county tags, and then, deeper in, private company markings. At the far end of the tunnel, a small chamber opened up, filled with stagnant water and corroded valves. One of the inspectors knelt, shining his light on a logo half buried in rust. It wasn't the county's emblem. It was a corporate insignia, Crestline Infrastructure Group. I'd never heard of them. But when I searched later that night, I discovered they'd been dissolved decades ago after multiple lawsuits involving illegal waste disposal. They had used lakes like mine, natural reservoirs, they called them, to hide industrial runoff beneath new housing developments. The realization hit me like a wave. Patricia wasn't lying. She had tried to expose it, but she'd chosen destruction over disclosure. And my aunt, she must have found out too late, trying to buy the lake to contain the damage. It wasn't just a neighborhood feud anymore. It was a buried scandal spanning decades, one that the county, the developers, and the HOA had all tried to erase. The next day, the county sealed off the tunnel and opened a full investigation. Reporters flooded the area again, helicopters circling overhead. As I stood at the lake's edge, the surface shimmered under the sun, innocent again, hiding everything that had been buried beneath. But as I watched the water move, I thought of Patricia's last words. You were supposed to find it too. For the first time I understood. The real ugliness was never the lake. It was the truth they tried to drown in it. It was over. Or at least, that's what I told myself. The county had sealed the tunnels, the EPA was now involved, and Crestline Infrastructure's name was back in headlines after 30 years of silence. The HOA dissolved, the community evacuated for testing, and Patricia was taken back into custody. But even as the official reports called it a victory for environmental justice, something inside me refused to rest. Because every night since that day, I'd been hearing it again, the soft ripple of water against my window. At first, I thought it was just wind. Then one night, I saw it. A faint glow spreading across the lake, pulsing beneath the surface like a heartbeat. The investigation team said there was no remaining chemical activity, no leaks, no toxins. Nothing that could explain light under the water. But I knew better. The lake had always been alive in its own strange way. And now it was stirring again. 3 weeks later, the officials left. The gates around Silver Birch Estates reopened for the first time. The news vans vanished, and all that remained was silence. I walked back alone, passing rows of abandoned houses. Paint peeled from walls, curtains fluttered through broken windows, and rusted garden signs whispered in the wind. By the time I reached the lakeshore, the sun was bleeding orange across the sky. The water reflected it perfectly, calm, perfect, deceptive. I crouched near the edge. Beneath the surface, the shimmer was back, faint but unmistakable. And then, just as I leaned closer, I saw it. A face. Not mine. Not human. For a split second, the water twisted, reflecting an image that didn't belong. A woman with long dark hair drifting weightlessly beneath the surface, eyes open, staring straight up. I fell backward, gasping. When I looked again, the reflection was gone. Only the ripples remained. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every strange moment, my aunt's silence before she died, Patricia's cryptic words, the unexplained file. There had to be something more. At 2 a.m., I grabbed a flashlight and returned to my aunt's study. Dust still clung to the old furniture, and the faint smell of cedar filled the room. I checked every drawer, every cabinet. Nothing. Then I remembered something Patricia had said during our last meeting. Your aunt thought she could save it by owning it. But ownership is an illusion. It was always meant to sink. Sink. My gaze shifted to the floorboards. I moved the rug aside, and there it was, a narrow seam in the wood barely visible. Using a screwdriver, I pried it open. Inside was a small metal box wrapped in a faded handkerchief. Inside the box, a single key. Attached was a tag that read, Pump House, Restricted Access. I froze. The pump house had been condemned decades ago. The engineers said it was sealed. But if my aunt still had the key, it meant someone had been using it. By dawn, I was standing before the pump house, a squat concrete building half swallowed by vines at the far end of the lake. The door's hinges creaked as I unlocked it. Inside, the air was damp and cold. Machinery rusted in silence. But beneath the layer of decay, I saw fresh footprints. I followed them down a metal staircase, spiraling into the earth. My flashlight beam flickered over mossy pipes and dripping valves. The sound of water echoed somewhere below, slow, rhythmic, unnatural. At the bottom of the stairs, I reached a heavy steel door. It was half open. Inside, a figure stood by the central valve, turning it slowly. "Patricia," I whispered. She didn't turn at first. Then she spoke, her voice calm but broken. "I told them not to seal it. You can't trap what's alive." "What are you doing?" I asked, stepping closer. She looked back at me. Her face was pale, her eyes empty, but her hands moved with purpose. "It's not poison in the lake, Emma. It's memory. The water remembers everything we buried here. The waste, the lies, the bodies." "The bodies?" I repeated, my voice trembling. She smiled faintly. "You didn't think Eleanor died of natural causes, did you?" My heart stopped. Before I could react, she turned the final valve. A deep groan rumbled through the floor. The walls began to shake. Cold water burst from a pipe above, flooding the chamber. I ran for the stairs, slipping on the wet concrete. Behind me, Patricia's voice echoed, almost serene. "You'll see her again, Emma. The lake doesn't let go." The water rose fast. I reached the upper level just as the door gave way, sealing the lower chamber under a violent surge. When I turned back, Patricia was gone. Only bubbles remained, rising through the flood, vanishing into darkness. They found me hours later, half-conscious near the dock. The pump house had collapsed overnight, sinking into the lake completely. Officials called it an accident. The news said Patricia had likely drowned. No trace of her body was ever recovered. But I know what I saw. When I looked into the lake the next morning, the water was still, calm, clear, and deep beneath the surface. For a fleeting moment I saw them both, Patricia and Eleanor, standing side by side, their reflections merging as one. Then the sun rose higher and the image disappeared. A month later, I sold the property. The county plans to drain the lake and rebuild the ecosystem from scratch. But no one wants the job. Workers keep quitting after a few days, saying they hear voices under the surface at night. As for me, I've moved far away, inland, where there's no water nearby. But sometimes, when it rains, I hear it again, the sound of soft ripples, calling from somewhere I can't see. And every time, I remember Patricia's last words. The lake doesn't let go. Some nights, I dream I'm standing at the water's edge again. My reflection smiles back. But it isn't me.